This is the game I made in Unity for my final project. Please enjoy. In this video I will be briefly presenting my pre-production for the final project. I started out by reading the brief and thinking about games I was interested in that I could both relate to personally and relate to the brief. I thought of The Legend of Zelda, Pokemon, Mighty Switch Wars and Mutant Mudds. Here you can see the initial plan that I came up with. I also looked at the C++ and C# syntax online. They both look similar to other languages I'd previously used, so I was okay with using both of them. I chose Unity in the end because it is generally recommended for 2D game making, in contrast to the other popular engine, Unreal, which is only recommended for 3D gaming. Next I will show you the flowcharts that I've produced. I started out with briefly detailing the initialization and start of the game. I then listed the variables within the enemy and player objects that need to be accessed when events are happening within the game. Finally, I plotted all the functions that I would use in the game. The main ones are the player-enemy movement and collision functions. They closely resemble each other, and in truth they could be merged into one function with a bit more parameterizing, but it would be harder to construct and possibly harder to read. Having never made a game and having never made flowcharts before coding anything, I was surprised how easy it was to detail the logic of a simple game in a higher level sense. It is time consuming, but it is easy. I am still confused by what the various shapes in a flowchart mean though. The main difficulties I came across were having to add parts in that I forgot in the flowcharts, and as ever with coding, making sure I set booleans on and off in the right places and use the right logical connectives. Luckily I foresaw some of this based on a recent problem I solved in Python using ChatGPT. At the start of production I went through some inbuilt tutorials to get comfortable with the Unity game engine. Following on from that I started with looking at player movement for a 2D top-down game. I found this code which I inserted into my project in Unity and then added it to the player game object, zeroing the gravity of the rigid body so the player didn't appear to drift down. Next I looked at doing a simple colour change with a key press, which took me to the Unity scripting API reference for colour. It was relatively easy to determine how to set preset colours, but it took me a while to figure out how to do custom colours. As for how to switch between the colours, I usually opt for the hash table style method with key value pairs. I found out you use dictionary for this and copied the syntax from a cheat sheet. I also looked at the key press event and tried get value method and eventually got things working. Next the lecturer suggested this beginner's tutorial. I took the snippets from there and added them to my game code. It was very useful in setting up a camera that would track the player and useful in setting up a game over and restart sequence. It took ages to troubleshoot though, partly because I think one part was incorrect. Next I made enemies and looked at enemy movement. The lecturer helped me find this YouTube tutorial which suited my project. The next part I looked at was the layer collision matrix and how setting the player enemy collision checkbox allowed player and enemy to collide. I made a collision event for both the player and enemy, and upon them colliding with each other they triggered game over. I also made it that if the player is white, enemies don't move towards the player and the player slides under them. I also varied the speeds of the enemies. After that I started to add walls to obstruct enemies and added more detail to the scene. I added some code that would allow a player and enemy to move through a wall conditionally, setting the trigger of its collider on when necessary and enabling disabling the wall spray. I also added game objects of text that would be revealed on the walls gradually in order to help the player. I wasn't sure how to do this inside Unity, so I compromised by doing something quick on Paint, matching the background of the wall. My other key ability, teleporting, was simple in principle, since it just reassigns a property on the player object that defines the position of the player. The difficulty was adding additional conditions which helped disambiguate things and make it obvious to the player where they were going. For instance, the teleport toggle had to be in camera view and I had to pair it with the source teleporter, and I wanted one of the pair to show up at a time. Originally I wanted to move through wall enemies and teleport enemies separately, but in the end I decided all enemies would just move through walls conditionally and there wouldn't be any enemy teleporting for now. The player would collect the abilities from colliding with game objects in the level. The final part of my production consisted of implementing shooting and damage mechanics. The damage was fairly straightforward, it just was a case of incrementing variables when collision with a bullet occurred. The basic shooting was simple too, but figuring out how to fire bullets out to different sides of the enemies was a complex process. It took me 2 whole days to figure out the precise angle and vector formulae, which I did via trial and error. Overall the development has been successful, but it took a very long time to implement multiple basic mechanics that make gameplay remotely satisfying. In the post-production I started by getting feedback from 4 peers who were interested in game development. I asked them the following on Discord. 1. What should I prioritize developing next out of these? A. Player health points overlay. B. Sound effects. C. More level. Or D. Anything else such as laying mines. 2. Are there any small tweaks like speed or colouring that could be changed? The 2 winning suggestions were to focus on C. More level and A. on an overlay. Most highlighted the difficult to fix bugs when a player or enemy is blocked by an invisible wall as the other goes through, and bullets going through walls that they shouldn't. For both cases I didn't have a great solution. I was able to fix a bug where destroyed bullets left the green and red walls invisible though, by doing this return visibility method. Someone also found a wall passing bug I hadn't noticed, which I fixed quickly by making the walls thicker. The main complaint was the lack of health, which wasn't helped by a bug where the pausing of damage wasn't working for bullets. After fixing that, I made sure every enemy spawns health consumables and the abilities also restored health. I also decided to increase max health to 5 in preparation for the later parts of the level. As for the main development, I focused on developing 2 extra main areas in a final boss fight, as well as the overlay displaying health, points and hits taken. The overlay was easy to edit the content of, but hard to manipulate the dimensions of. For the colour-based abilities, the red introduced the blocking via rotation, and the blue introduced an optional multi-bullet attack. At this stage, it was mainly about using my existing engine knowledge rather than learning new techniques. Overall, I'm pleased with making my first game from scratch and learning how to operate Unity along the way. I would have liked to have polished it more, but I look forward to learning how to engage players more in future projects.